Well, look at that. Look at that.
Every
I got a new.
time. Love the intro. Love the intro every time.
I've got well, as you know, we had some chats before that we went live here, but I just installed a new browser. I was actually able to watch that whole thing. Yeah. So
Oh, there you go.
I blame
So,
it on
so for
Google.
those of you who say you'll actually see when Jeff's mouth moves now, you'll actually see the words and everything come out too. We think
Don't say that
we
too
solved the
soon.
problem.
Don't
Don't want
speak
to
too
jinx
soon.
it, but we think we solved the problem. So just
Don't
want to say
jinx us.
welcome to today's podcast. As always, Mr. Jeff Coffman, founder of Sub2 Empire, and I'm Ken. And we're here just a couple of guys doing some real estate deals here and there, and hopefully talking about today. So what's our topic today, Jeff?
Well, I thought we would talk about uh, a lot of people get freaked out about subject to deals, and it's not something we've talked about in a while, but I kind of want to go over uh, just maybe ease some folks' minds about subject to deals, and maybe talk about some of the risk factors that go into doing a subject to deal, and just maybe how we can get around or how we can deal with. I don't want to say get around. That makes it sound illegal or something like that. But just how we can deal with particular risk factors when we're talking about subject to.
So
And
could we?
yeah,
Oh, I'm sorry. Could we just go back and reset? Like we're Sub2 Empire, so we always have this assumption. I think that anybody that might watch this or watch the replay of it or whatever is familiar with subject to. But let's just reset for everybody if we could. When we talk about subject to, like define subject to for everybody, and then let's get into the different risks for the parties involved.
yeah. One of my favorite things is because I just love how this is put together. When we're talking about subject to, what is we're talking about assuming someone's debt on a mortgage. That's really all we're talking about. Now, there's a big difference between assuming a mortgage and assuming the debt on a mortgage. And with subject to, we are not going out and qualifying for a loan. We're not assuming a mortgage. We're not qualifying with a bank. We're not filling out an application. We're not doing any of that stuff. So when we buy a house subject to, we are making a promise to the seller that we are going to assume and pay their debt that they already have in place on that particular mortgage. That is all the subject to deal is.
Yeah. Their monthly payments. You're,
Their
you're
monthly payments.
assuming you're assuming the monthly payment is a good is how I like to say that. You're
Yep.
not assuming the loan obligation, right? And just to be clear, the loan stays in the original borrower's name, stays in, subject
Yep.
to that loan, right?
Yep. The greatest tool that we have in my view in all of real estate. I think it's if it ever goes away, I don't know what I would do. I don't know. I can't see where I'd be without this strategy. Honestly,
It's
it's just such a great strategy.
it is just great. It is funny you mentioned that go away because this might be a good time to just say. So let's just talk about why subject to, right? We'll talk about the risk, but what subject to gets a bad rap sometimes. Well, it gets a bad rap because there's jackasses out there doing stupid shit and screwing the sellers.
Yeah.
That's the bottom. I mean, that happens. That happens in every area of real estate. But when you're talking about like hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of mortgages, and then these sellers are left high and dry from all that, and the property goes into foreclosure because the payments aren't being made, and all that stuff too. Like it gives everybody a bad name. So first things first, this is just what we like to do. Like we don't do anything without acting with integrity. If you can't make that monthly, if you're going to assume that subject to debt, and you have some belief that you can't possibly make from your circumstances as the buyer, you can't make that monthly payment, then don't do the deal. You
Yeah.
are making an obligation, a promise to that seller that you're going to make those payments, and you should make those payments.
Yeah,
Right?
and that's why it's so important to really evaluate that deal, vet that deal, do your due diligence on that deal long before you commit to actually following through with the subject to part of it. I mean, because it's one thing. I don't know about you, but like it stresses me. It's one thing for me to fail, and it's one thing for me to to pay the price for a bad decision. But if I make a bad decision and I drag somebody else into that, that is just, to me, that is. I mean, my hands are sweating thinking about it right now. Like I just don't like it. So I'm just kind of piggybacking on the integrity thing. You got to do your due diligence on this thing. One of those ways that you can do that to make sure that your deals are actually going to be profitable before you actually commit to doing a subject to deal and closing on one. Go head over to our website. Go to sub2empire.com. Up in the header up there in the menu items, there's we have a free subject to calculator. We just give that away to everybody for this specific reason, because with that calculator, now, of course, those numbers can be fudged as well. So you
Right.
have to have integrity. You have to be truthful about the real actual numbers that you're plugging into that calculator, or it's just going to, bad data in, bad data out. That's what you're going to get. But if you have a mortgage statement and you can plug those numbers in that need to be plugged in, and if you're realistic about maybe the repairs, you're realistic about your exit strategy, that tool, that calculator, can really help you out. It can really put you on the right path of, I mean, the very first question obviously you have to ask is, does this deal can the deal pay for itself, and can I make these payments? And if the answer to that, if you have to think about that, then the answer is going to be no. And I think one of the things that I really love to say is, once I finally learned and convinced myself that these deals are really out there, one of the things I really like to say is, just because you can do a subject to deal doesn't mean that you should. Man, I'm gonna pause this real quick. I didn't turn my light on here. It's really, really dark. So go ahead though. I'm listening. I promise. Hold on. I promise. I'll be back.
No worries. So let's talk a
like
little
real
bit.
professionals here, huh?
Let's talk. Well, yeah. Now say so. Now that's just great, because now you got this big light in front of you or whatever too. So now you're all warm and fuzzy with this soft white glow you've got about you now, and I'm still back here in the dark cave because I don't have a light near me.
Yeah, you look
a
like
little light ring on the camera
like
is
a
not
minister of death over there, like the
so.
Grim Reaper.
It's all good. So let's talk about a little bit then about the subject to, like, so we're talking about risks and rewards to you. And remember, so there's two parties to the transaction, right? There's the seller, and then there's the investor. I think let's start with the seller. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, and so I'll just pose the question, then we can chat about it. It's like what are the major risks of a sub two deal for the seller?
Well, obviously, the very first question you're going to get from a seller is, the first question is always going to be, well, how long will you be paying on this loan? That's usually the first question. And then the second question, which is the most important question, I believe, is, well, what happens if you stop paying? What happens if you stop paying on this mortgage? And there's a real simple answer to that, but sometimes it can be hard to convey to a seller unless you have ultimate trust and rapport with the seller. And so that's where I focus with. But that second question, there's an easy answer to that. And the way that I always, when I'm talking to a seller, the way that I approach that and answer that question is, and I try not to make it sound like I'm insulting the seller or anything, but I kind of pose a question of, well, Mr. or Ms. Seller, what happens? I'm going to put a ton of money into this deal. Like, I'm going to put, whatever it might be. It could be, and by the way, it's probably not going to be my money, but I'm going to put money into this deal. I have to make some repairs. I have to catch up your mortgage. Do you really think it would make sense for me to put all this money in this deal and then not make the mortgage payments and let this thing foreclose? That does not make sense as an investor. I would never do that. And so I realized that just now, as I'm explaining that sounds condescending, but that is kind of what you have to help them understand is, it's not just, they're not the only ones taking a risk here. You are also taking a risk by and besides that, you're an investor. So you wouldn't make money on this property. You wouldn't be able to cash flow this property or, uh, generate revenue otherwise if those payments weren't being made, because it's gonna go to foreclosure and you're gonna end up losing everything. So that's the way that I present it to a seller, for the most part anyway.
And that's perfect too. But I think also too, when I talk to sellers, I just want to make it clear to them too, because this goes back to the integrity part. Like I'm not trying to hide anything, right? We can't be doing the sleight of hand with the sub two stuff, right?
Right.
There is too much stuff at risk. Is that they need to understand, like, it will go to foreclosure if for some reason it happens, like, in a worst case scenario, like something happens to me or the members of the LLC that's going to operate this thing, or whatever the case may be, and payments aren't made, then it's going to go to foreclosure, much like it is now if you're in arrears, Mr. Seller, right? So the same thing could happen. But then but then what you said, Jeff, is so important. But I'm not going to, like, this is an investment for me and I need it to make money. So if it's not making money for me, like I can't do it. So if I'm not paying if I'm not paying that debt, then it's going to be foreclosed on. It's not going to be an asset for me. It needs to be an asset. So that the likelihood of that's going to be small, right? But
Yeah.
the true answer to your question, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, is that it'll go back into foreclosure just like it is now.
Yep.
If you're in arrears. Yeah.
Yep.
So. Yep.
Yeah. So,
okay.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say I don't know if we want to move on to kind of one of the next. That's more along the seller objections. Any question like that is always an objection. Like it's a really good way to look at questions. And this is not something this is not an original thought of mine, but I learned this. I even forgot who I learned it from, but really, I think it was in some sales training is what it was actually. But any question is an objection. That's what it is. And so this kind of what you're saying, to me, it kind of, we get into, this is actually, maybe it's a good time to say this, but over the next couple of weeks, we're actually gonna be talking about subject to specifically. So, and we are I think in 2 weeks, right? That's the last one, Ken?
Yeah, we're going to do it for 3 weeks, I think. Yeah.
It's it's all going to be about seller objections. So, if you see this, if you watch this, make sure you're clicking subscribe and you're getting notified when this goes live, because seller objections, I think that's probably the number one hurdle that people have with doing subject to deals. Anybody can learn how to do these things. It's the human aspect. It's learning how to deal with sellers and really understanding the right things to say, so that you're not scaring them off. But I do want to talk about the second most common fear that investors have when it comes to subject to, and that is the due on sale clause. Right? Everyone is so freaked out about this due on sale clause.
Yes,
and
which is a risk in both directions too, by the way, right? But both for the seller and the buyer, for sure. Yeah, due on sale.
Yep, 100%. Because really, if we're just being honest, if you get a note call due on a subject to deal, that, let's say, and it's not uncommon for us to do this, if we buy a property subject to, and that property has very little or almost no equity in it, and you get the note call due, your chances of getting that finance, unless you bring a bunch of cash to the table, which you're trying to avoid in the first place by buying it subject to, your chances of getting a lender to lend on that deal to get to stop that, I say repossession, but stop that foreclosure or stop that that note being called. Really, the only way to do that is to buy the property with outside funding. Yeah, you've run into a real problem there. I mean, so I will just say, and I think it's good advice. I think it's probably the best advice. Due on sale, you have to start with a good foundation, just like anything else. You have to start with a solid process and a solid system for not putting up those red flags, and for uh, I'm mainly just referring to the paperwork. Like, that's something that a lot of people don't really like to deal with, but you have to have a. It's like anything else. You have to have a good foundation. You have to build this. You have to structure the deal correctly, so that, number one, you're not sending up a bunch of red flags, and you're not inviting this note to be called due, or accelerated. So, and then the second piece to that is, Ken, I think this is your favorite. This is your favorite line, right?
Yeah.
Second piece of that is make those payments, man. If
Yeah.
you cannot make those payments, there's no doubt that this note will be accelerated. There's no doubt about it. So those are the two big ones. And then the third, at least from what I see, the third most common reason that I see these, and I haven't seen many. I haven't seen many do notes accelerated. But the third most common reason is going to be insurance.
Yep.
People, for some reason, I don't know. Maybe I'm just I've just done enough of them that I don't understand why people complicate this. But insurance it seems to be like, it just blows people's minds. Like, and I don't get it. I don't get why that. It's simple. If you always remember that the insurance follows the legal title holder and not the individual that is on the loan, then it's easy to understand that you have to have a new a new insurance policy. You must get a new insurance policy on these things. And I don't know about you. I've just, if you go through and read the Facebook comments out in all these Facebook groups, I get infuriated, because I just see these folks just really taking stabs at how to set up these policies. And quite honestly, it's just really not that hard. The hard part about the insurance thing is finding. It's just like anything else when you're talking about creative deals. It's finding the right people to work with. In this case, insurance companies or agents who understand what you're doing. That is the hard part about the whole thing. The policy is the simple. It's really, really easy. As long as, I'm going to simplify this, but as long as the borrower on the loan is listed as additionally insured on that policy, that is the very minimum requirement that you have to have in place. And
and of course, the lost payee being the sub
Sure.
mortgage holder.
Sure.
Outside of that, outside of that, you're pretty good, unless you just have all kinds of crazy shit listed on your insurance policy.
Yeah, I mean,
that they're going to get the declaration page, so
Yeah, it blows me away to see. And again, I think it's just a fear thing. It's just people are fearful of this due on sale thing, so they try and overcompensate. And you don't need to. It's really just as simple as, who is the lost payee? It's always going to be the mortgagee, right? Always. So it's always going to be the lender. You have the named insured on the policy, which is going to be the name of the new title holder. So if you bought that property subject to and you deeded it into an LLC, the LLC must be the named insured on that policy. It has to. You can't. You're not like in the Matrix, like trying to figure out all these different angles. No, it follows the legal title holder. Period.
Right.
And then your borrower who's on the loan, because this is what a lender is going to want to see. They're going to want to see that when that declarations page gets shipped over to them, they're going to want to see that borrower as insured somewhere on that policy, and they will be insured as additionally insured. So those are the minimum requirements on an insurance policy for a subject to deal.
Yep.
And it's that simple.
It is. Right. It's not overcomplicated. So then some people will say, Jeff, keep it on the insurance theme. And remember, we're talking about insurance here as a red flag. Like, it's probably the number one red flag to the lenders because we're doing all kinds of crazy crap with the insurance policy, and the lender's like, what is going on here, or whatever, or you don't have the borrower on there for whatever reason. The other thing, so if you have the title in the LLC, make sure that you have the individual members of the LLC as other additional insureds, other named insureds on there too. That way you have now your borrower and seller individually, and now you have all these other individuals. It looks like they're all just members of the LLC. Right. So now the lender is going to question that much less. And the way to get around that totally is, right, Jeff, not to plug this, but shameless plug, right? Like, put it in a trust.
Put it in a trust. Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
And then have all the parties to the trust as additional insureds down there. Like, and of course the borrower, but then the beneficiaries of the trust as additional insured and all that stuff too. The lenders understand trusts. They see it all the time for estate planning purposes. And a land trust is just a specific estate planning purpose, right? Estate planning tool as we use them, right? At least as we use them for the most part. So that is a true statement. And so that's a shameless plug. Like, we've got the trust documents there, and of course the sub 2 document package, as Jeff mentioned. Like, make sure you have good documents and good systems. Like, we have that available for you as well. But let's go back though to the due on sale. So how do you avoid, just to tie it all out too, how do you avoid the due on sale clause? First and foremost, make the payment, stupid. Number one. Number two, make sure your insurance policy is appropriate and you're not doing crazy crap in there, and everybody's insured appropriately. That's all the lender wants, is everybody to be insured appropriately, and they get paid first. That's all they care about, right? I mean, the long and short of it, that's all they care about. So just make sure that happens, right? And if you're doing those things, then you're so now your risk, right? Talking about the risk, right? Your risk has gone from, what did they say, from here to here. That's simple.
As it relates to insurance, I mean, also I want to add number 3 on there. That number 3 is the foundation part. Setting, buying this in the correct entity, buying this in a way that is not, you would never, for example, you would never want to buy a property. Well, it's not necessarily the case, but for business purposes, you would never want to buy a property subject to and put it in your own name. That'd probably be a huge red flag. So what I'm trying to say is the foundation of how you, at what entity you title that property into, and the foundation, the groundwork that you do before you even close on that deal, is of utmost importance as well.
Yep.
All right.
And sorry, before we move on, can I also add one other thing about the due on sale? You had mentioned this before, but let's just to tie it out maybe a little bit. And first of all, don't freak the hell out if the due on sale clause is actually invoked. Well, maybe freak out a little, but like, okay, take a step back and just say, okay, how can we fix this problem? We solve people's problems, right? Especially if you're talking about a subject to deal, like, we're solving a problem that seller has. Okay. And so this is just another problem to be solved. So it's okay. Like, speak directly. You can speak directly with the lender and just say, hey, here's what's going on. We put it in a trust, whatever it is. You can just say, like, how do we make that, like, how are we going to solve this problem? And they'll tell you. Like, I've seen actual examples when I've researched this where the bank says, well, we don't want the title to transfer, but you could do that as an agreement for deed if you want. Mm-hmm. Okay. Right. I like, there's lots of ways, and you'd be surprised. Like, the banks don't want to foreclose. It's a damn hassle for them. Mm-hmm. Right. It's an expense. It's a hassle. It's a headache too. So, they will work. Now, some people are just asses. Like, that's everywhere. And you might run along that, and this particular person or the
We're
person
talking
in charge.
about Wells Fargo right now. Wells Fargo.
We won't want to name names, but Wells Fargo.
Wells Fargo's the worst.
So yeah, but it's okay. And maybe you can't. Maybe you got to go out there and figure out some kind of plan to get that paid off and get out of it too. But that's okay too. That's why we have private money. Like,
yeah.
Yeah. Or that's why we're here. Like, maybe we could, like, we get all kinds of ideas about how to fix that.
Yeah,
How
I
to,
say like honestly, this is the third time I've said this. All right, but setting those, particularly purchasing a property in a trust, that is, in my opinion, that is the most important piece of this entire thing. I mean, there's just you got to understand that a trust is an entirely private. It's not even an entity. It's an agreement. It's a contract with a third party. It's totally private. And so, what goes on inside that trust could actually save you from something like this.
yeah.
It's just setting it up correctly. And honestly, I mean, I've never had one called. I've never even, the only time I got kicked back one time early on, where we had, I don't know, it was like the spaghetti, like you were talking about with the spaghetti insurance policy. Like you just, like, everything was all over. I didn't really know what I was doing. The only time I ever really got called, and the note didn't get called, I'm just saying I got called out on setting the insurance policy up incorrectly. And literally what happened was the lender at the time, it was, oh crap, what's the one out of, they're in Los Angeles. I'm zoning on this lender right now. Anyway, it's not important, but they actually sent me a letter on how this insurance policy was supposed to be set up. Like, they sent it to me. So
Right.
bing, bang, boom, send it over to my agent. We get it set up and send it back. Everything's fine. Everything's totally fine.
Which tells you that they're not interested in foreclosing or accelerating a loan or doing any of that. Like, they just want the payments to be made.
Right. Yep. It was Penny Mac is who it was. Sorry. Penny Mac.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So
Very, very interesting.
have we beat this one up enough?
Yeah, that's well. Let's talk about. So let's go back to the risk reward. Try to keep it on that thing too. So we talked about some of those. So are there any other seller risks there? And then we'll go back and do an investor. Any other primary seller risk? So obviously the loan staying in their name. And so if it gets defaulted on, like, so me as the investor buyer now, right, is taking title of the property. If I don't make the payments, it's going to come back on them, right? So we already talked about that risk to them. But another risk too. Oh, this is another one, like going back to your list of objections, but we'll call it a risk too. Is like they can't, or at least they perceive an idea that they can't qualify for another loan, right? So that could be a potential risk to them as well too. So how do we overcome that one?
Well, I'm going to be honest. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes you can't overcome that, because literally their ability to qualify for another loan, it all boils down to debt to income. What is their debt to income ratio? That is the number one factor. If their debt to income ratio is above 43%, then they are not going to qualify for a loan. So, yes, it can be a huge issue. However, there are actually ways to deal with that as well, and those methods are outlined by Fannie. And so you can go out and you can read the guidelines in Fannie. I don't know the publication. I don't memorize stuff like that. But Fannie has guidelines on this, and essentially, what we've done when we buy a property subject to is we've turned it into an investment property. And so Fannie allows a 75%, what's the word I'm looking for? Allowance, I guess.
Discount.
Is what I'm looking for.
Maybe that's the best word.
Maybe that's the best
of the monthly. Yeah.
Right. So they will allow a 75% quote discount on against someone's debt to income ratio based upon the income that property is producing. And so we actually work with our sellers, and we can provide the rent rolls, we can provide all of that information, and hopefully that drops them down below that 43% debt to income issue, right? What we have, this is like one of those golden nuggets moments right now, because I think this is something that we actually, I don't know that anybody else is doing this, to be honest with you. when was it? I think it was I don't know, sometime early this year. We had I had a one of my sellers who I bought a four family. I bought it on subject to financing, and he called me up and he's like, "Hey, I'm trying to refinance my personal residence, but I've got this four family that I no longer own that is still showing up on my credit report." And I'm like, "All right, well, hey, no problem. We'll work with you on it. We'll get it resolved because I've done the other strategy before where I've provided rent rolls and all this stuff. It all worked just fine." However, we had an issue at the time. It was a short-term rental property, and so it wasn't like we had and it had only been a short-term rental property for like 3 or 4 months, and so we didn't have the records to show the income, the annual income on that property. So it was a problem. So what we ended up doing was there are some guidelines, again provided by Fannie, that talks about debt obligations and debt paid by others. And so, actually, I think I talked to you. I think you may have even. I think I talked to you about this one.
Wrote the letter. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. So now what we do, in addition to trying to provide rent rolls, and if we don't do that, now what we'll do is we create an affidavit. All right. So the rule goes like something like this. I don't know this verbatim, but it goes something like this. It's if you have a court order where that debt obligation is transferred to someone else, or if you can, what do you say? What's the statement I'm looking for, Ken? You got to help me with my English language this morning.
If you
You
could,
would be
well,
the
if you can just provide record or evidence that someone else has been obligated to that debt.
correct. Yep. And so for us, it was like, well, who else can we get to? Like there's no court order in place. So actually, what we did is we created an affidavit. We created, signed, and had our signatures notarized on an affidavit stating that we are now obligated to make that mortgage payment. It was a total crapshoot. Like we didn't know. We had no idea. Sent that into the lender, no issues whatsoever. They accepted it, no problem. They were able to get my seller, their borrower, underwritten for a refi on his personal residence. So it worked out really well. So there are ways around this. We can solve this problem. Again, this is what we get paid to do. We don't get paid to rent properties out. We don't get paid for, that's just a benefit. That's just a benefit of what we actually do. What we really do is we really solve problems.
Well, right. And this goes back to the integrity, right? So this is the integrity. We said we're going to be obligated for that debt, and all we're doing is putting in writing what we said initially.
Yep.
Right. And so that's what I mean, yeah, I feel like that's kind of our responsibility to the seller. That's what we agreed to up front. You know,
For sure.
actually kind of said that in our sub-2 documents, right? Like, boy, I wonder who put that stuff in there. Like, you know, you gotta make sure you're taking care of that underlying seller because they trusted you, right? Me. They trusted me to do what I say I'm going to do, and I'm damn well going to do it. That's the bottom line. So now, so just curious. So let's talk. Let's move into a little bit then about because the investor has some risk too, and let's just take a step back too. So one of my answers to all this, it just depends on the situation of the sub-2 deal, but the vast majority of the time, let's not forget that a seller is open to, or you convince them that sub-2 is a reasonable strategy, right? Like sub-2 deals.
I hate that word. I hate that word, by the way. Yeah, I don't want to convince them. That's just that seems kind of dirty to me. You agree upon it, like you're in this together. Like this is the only solution that you've got, type of thing. Yeah. So anyway, sorry about that. Go ahead.
But most of the time, it's some kind of distress situation, right? And so what, honestly, now you don't have to beat them over the head with this, but honestly speaking, what's the likelihood they're going to be in any position at all especially if the loan's in arrears, right? If they're behind in the loan, if they're going to be in any position at all to go out and get new debt in 12 months or 24 months or 36 months. I mean,
That's a really good point. Yeah.
let's make sure we have a reality check there sometimes too.
Mhm.
Again, you don't have to be rude about it, but just to say, hey, your credit report has taken all these hits because the loan's in arrears. Like, I'm going to make it good for you, right? That's part of our agreement. Like, I'm going to make that good for you. And oh, by the way, when I make all of these monthly payments on your behalf for the loan, your credit's going to get better, right?
Yep.
So that's an advantage to the seller. So I'm just curious. So I just wanted to toss that out there, but let's talk about some investor risk, right? That was another seller risk. Let's talk about another investor risk. So what happens, Jeff? Like, this could be, again, along the lines that the seller is distressed in some way, right? They're behind in their payments, the mortgages in arrears, all that stuff too. So you can solve that particular problem, but they might also have $50,000 of crushing credit card debt. They might have a $40,000 auto loan they can't pay. They might have all these other kinds of debt obligations in there. What happens if they declare bankruptcy, saying that the mortgage is in their name? What happens if they declare bankruptcy like 6 months later, let's say? So you close on the deal, and 6 months later they file bankruptcy, and you start getting these notices, right? Or the trust, or however you set up that the property starts getting notices potentially, right? So what's that, or from the loan, the lender's getting notices, whatever that looks like. So how do you address that? What if that seller files bankruptcy? Like, that could be a risk from an investor perspective.
Well, I would back up first. I would back up to I wouldn't even approach that subject. I don't want to approach that subject just yet. I don't want to act as if that's happened, or I don't want to start where we've already received notice that there's a bankruptcy that's been filed. I want to go back to, again, the foundational part of this, which would be a simple question to the seller. Mr. or Mrs. Seller, I don't know what your current financial situation looks like. This was in arrears, so I'm going to ask you a personal question. Is that okay? Yes, that's okay. The question is, do you have any intentions on filing for bankruptcy at any point in the next 90 days? And if that answer is anything other than no, then that is going to be a red flag. You probably don't want to do that deal. If they hem-haw around and they're thinking about it, you might approach it as, well, hey, give me, if I buy this property from you today, I need at least 90 days. 90 days is the general cutoff for. So what's going to happen is, if they do file for bankruptcy, obviously this is going to show up on their. They have to make, there's a declaration that they have to fill out. It's all their debt obligations. This is going to show up. This property is going to show up. However, if that property was sold, longer than 90 days prior to their filing, generally speaking, you're going to be okay. And I know this because I've actually been subpoenaed twice for the sale records on a property where this exact scenario played out. This exact same thing happened. So first of all, I'm going to go back to what Ken said. It's very good advice. Don't freak out. Do not freak out about this.
Don't freak out.
Because I read all the Facebook posts. I mean, people are freaking out there when this happens. I can tell you that in both scenarios, and by the way, one was a Chapter 13 bankruptcy and one was a Chapter 7 bankruptcy. And in either case, it did not matter. Here's what I did. I simply kept making the payments. I was freaking out on the first one. I'm not going to lie. Like, I was like, what do I do? Do I just stop making payments? Like, what do I do here? That is one of the worst things that you can do in this situation. Even if it turns out that you have to sell that property or something, because remember, you own it. So if it's in an active bankruptcy outside of 90 days, you can still sell that property. They're not going to reverse that sale. I mean, could they? They potentially, yes, they could. But They're not going
Very,
to. I'm telling you, they're not going to.
very unlikely. Yeah.
In fact, that is exactly what, on the second one, the second time I was subpoenaed for those records, that is actually what happened. I actually sold the property before I got the subpoena. So 90 days is the cutoff. Now I don't know the actual law, but this is what I've been told by a couple of attorneys, that you're okay outside of the 90 days. Really, what they were looking for when they sent me those subpoenas was, did these sellers earn money off of these sales to me? And there's a threshold that there's so much money that they are allowed to make off of one of these sales, and neither one of them had actually earned any money off of these sales. I did help one individual. I actually paid for moving them to. I moved her to Florida. So there was no constructive receipt of any cash, actually. So, and then the other guy, to be really honest, the dude gave me his house. Like, he gave it to me. I didn't put earnest money down or anything. He literally handed me a check. That's the way I look at it. So don't freak out. But I would also, I think more importantly is head that off way up front. Like, say, hey, are you planning to file bankruptcy in the next 6 months? And if you are, can you give me the time to season this, to solidify, season this title when I transfer title into whatever I'm going to transfer it into? And sometimes maybe they just can't wait. And this is the risk that you take. And so you just got to be aware of it, really. There's not a whole lot you can do about it. You can't force somebody to not follow through with filing. Right. It's a risk. It's definitely a risk. And if you're already buying a property that is maybe in pre-foreclosure, that risk definitely is going to increase. So again, there's no real answer to this. It's, are you willing to take the risk? What level of risk are you suited for? That's the only it's the only real answer here, unfortunately.
And you, of course, too, can take a look. Like, at least here in your state, like, we're here in the St. Louis metro area, and so we can look up the records. So we can see on those sellers, we can look up the seller's name in our state court system and see if they have judgments against them from credit card companies, from auto loan companies, from whatever. And you can, and if you're starting to see 3, 4, 5, 6 of them, and you say, okay, maybe this deal isn't that great. And then when you ask that bankruptcy question and they say no, or they hem haul around, well, the reason why they're thinking about bankruptcy, because you saw all those, those court filings or all those judgments that have been in there over the years too. And they were making the mortgage payment as long as they could. They let that other stuff go first, and then they're making the mortgage payment as long as they could, and they can't do that anymore. Yeah. And so now you just have to assess, okay, so now you can have an understanding of the bigger financial picture around the sellers. And like Jeff said, right, this is about honesty and trust. You just got to ask, right? Don't be an ass. Don't be an ass when you ask, but you know what I mean? Yeah, you just got to ask.
The only other thing that I could say that maybe an investor could use to kind of abate that risk a little bit would be to make sure that there is enough juice in this deal that you could potentially either sell the property or just refi the property. You know what I mean? Even that's not really the best answer, but because a lot of times, with these subject to deals, especially in this situation, many times, more times than not, they're going to be behind on their mortgage payments, and so you've got to bring some cash to the table to bring bring that mortgage current. But I mean, if there's one hedge, it would be to make sure that there's enough juice in the deal that if you sold it, you get all your money back and hopefully earn a profit off that deal. But it's a very tricky situation. It could be, luckily I've been really lucky in that I've only had to deal with that on, I don't know, maybe a handful of situations. I had those two situations, I think maybe like maybe tops of like 4 or 5 of those situations I've had to deal with where they did have plans on actually filing for bankruptcy, or that was in fact, the house. I'd actually just sold the house on seller financing last week. This house. That was the situation with those folks. They were thinking about it, and I talked, was like, hey, give me 6 months. Give me 6 months before you think about that. I know it's a little bit of a wait, but if I'm gonna help you out here, then we're gonna have to. Oh, by the way, I want to mention on that note that since the borrower is still on the hook for that loan, that will actually still, because there's a big question about this. If you buy a property subject to for someone who is going to file for bankruptcy, the question becomes then, well, is that debt obligation that they have, is that actually, can they use that to get them to, maybe they're kind of trying to decide between Chapter 13 and Chapter 7, where Chapter 13 being the repayment program, Chapter 7 being the complete wipe out the debt of the debt. Yeah. They actually can list that because it is their obligation. It's still their obligation, even though they're not paying it. They are still obligated under the terms of their agreement with the lender to make that payment. So if they wanted to go for Chapter 7, then they could still potentially use that debt obligation to do that. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there. Kind of irrelevant in our conversation here about investor risk, but still good information.
And what other, so those are manuals, like those are the high level risks, like we hear and see all the time too. But what other, from the investor standpoint, right? What other risks is the investor taking that you see?
Well, I mean, I think as far as if we're talking about subject to, those are I think we probably covered the biggest risks as far as subject to. The rest of the risk is just going to be your normal, from my point of view, at least from what I can think of right now. The rest of your risk is just going to be your normal and your normal stuff. Are you missing? Are there more repairs? Obviously, we're feeling the pinch of that right now, right? We're doing a rehab. In fact, we're doing a rehab on a property we bought subject to. So
sub 2 rehab.
So, I mean, the risk there was, we didn't know it. We didn't, you do your inspections, you find things that, you didn't plan on repairing. So, but I think that's really it, man. I know there's more out there. I know there's more that, that's subject to investors will have issues with, but I think those are the big ones. Those are like the top of mind things that every investor, when they go out and do a subject to deal, I think those are the very first things they have to think of.
Yeah. And just remember to lower your risk as an investor. Let's just tie it out here. We're getting to the end anyway. Geez, we sat here. It's been 50 minutes. We've been chatting about this and it feels like 5. So use good documents. Know what the hell you're doing, right? There is an education. There's a knowledge level that you need to do to make sure that you protect yourself and that you also protect the seller in there too. So write documents. Make sure that you have the good documents. We actually have a complete masterclass that Jeff's showing right there on the screen too. We also have the sub 2 document package. We can have that, like all of that's in there. Like these are the levels of things, right? The documents these are the documents we actually use in our business, and we design the documents to not only protect you as the investor, the buyer, right, the acquirer of the sub 2 property, but it's also to be upfront, open, and honest with the seller, right? That's the number one way you can lower the seller risk, is to be open, upfront, and honest about that, about what's going on with that. Right. So that's the number one thing there. So make sure you have paperwork, make sure you have an understanding of the process and the documents involved, and that you can use the documents properly, right? Because it does require some extra documents. It is true. It's just the way it is. Okay. For a sub 2 deal. So know that. Again, just to have integrity and be honest with the sellers, right? That's another big thing to lower your risk. And then just make the payment. Just make the payment, stupid. That's what we say. That like the if you look statistically, like you can look. I spent some time looking up stuff like that and staying current on real estate, as you might imagine, right? It's just like the amount of times the due on sale clause is invoked based on the number of mortgages that exist in this country is infinitesimally small. Like it rounds to zero. It really does. So like just make the payments.
Yeah. Yeah. And anytime like I said, I've never had one called. Um, I mean, I'm, if we're talking about numbers, talking about students, I know this might not be an astronomical number, but students, there's close to 300 deals across country. I've done personally over 90 deals here in the St. Louis area. And like I said, the only kickback I've ever had was that stupid insurance screw up that I had. Wasn't called. They showed me exactly what needed to be fixed, so I fixed it. And it is not saying that it couldn't be if you're not educating yourself about it, if you're not understanding what those flags are and what they look like, then I mean, you could run into problems. It's definitely a real possibility. I know people that have had that happen. And ironically enough, most of those people have actually thrown up a red flag themselves. And it's usually something in the way that they set it up, or insurance or something like that. So, but yeah, I think, I don't know, man. I don't know if there's anybody watching this in the St. Louis area. Today is the 18th of October. And tomorrow I will be speaking at the Gateway to Freedom Conference, 2:30 p.m. It actually started yesterday. They had a roundtable thing yesterday, and it's going through today. But if you're out there and you're in the St. Louis area, if you feel like traveling for one day to St. Louis, head to g2free.com, pick up a ticket, and come out. And we're going to talk about some really interesting stuff over there. It's a brand new slide deck for me, so I'm really hoping I can get through this one. But I'm going to do it anyway. But I think that's really it, man. Is that all you got?
Yep, that's it for the first sub two. Again, we're going to come back to different aspects of sub two deals in the next couple of weeks. But if you have questions or whatever you're thinking of, put them in the comments. Like wherever you're watching this, or you saw the feed or whatever, just put your comments there. We'll see them, and we'll answer them as we go along.
Absolutely. All right, guys, have a fantastic weekend. We will catch you guys next week, 11 a.m. Central.